Story 1. My mom used to hide under my bed at night. I was born in 2000, grew up in a small town in northeast Ohio. We had one of those little ranch-style houses, all on one floor, 3 bedrooms. It was just me and my mom for most of my life. My dad left when I was a baby. She was a good mom from what I remember. We didn't have much money, but she made sure I always had what I needed. She worked as a waitress at a restaurant in the center of town. Always tired, but always kind. We'd watch movies together at night. She'd tuck me in, kiss my forehead, and tell me she loved me. I felt safe, except at bedtime. I must have been about 6 or 7 the first time I noticed it. One night, after she tucked me in, I heard the floor creak after she turned off the light. Not out in the hall, right by my bed. I remember freezing, listening. Then I heard the sound of her breathing, slow, heavy, right underneath me. I leaned over the edge and whispered, "Mom?" She didn't answer, just this soft little giggle. Not mean, not playful, just weird. I called for her louder. After a few seconds, she crawled out from under the bed like it was the most normal thing in the world, smiled at me and said, "Go to sleep, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Then she left the room. The next night, same thing. I heard her crawl under right after lights out, the soft thud of her knees and hands against the floorboards, the shift of the mattress as she settled in, then the breathing. I was too little to really question it. I thought maybe it was just a game she liked to play. But the older I got, the more I realized it wasn't a game. It became a routine. She'd tuck me in like normal, turn off the light, and then she'd get under the bed. Every single night. And then she started doing little things. She would tap on the wood under my mattress in these odd rhythms. 3 taps, then 2, then 4. Sometimes it sounded almost like a song, other times like random patterns. If I moved or sat up, she'd stop until I lay back down. A couple times, I caught her peeking out from the foot of the bed. I'd feel eyes on me and look down, and there she was, her face just visible in the dark, one eye glinting in the faint light from the hall. No expression, just watching. I stopped sleeping well. I'd lie stiff under the covers, too afraid to move or call for her. If I tried to leave the bed, she'd grab my ankle. Not hard, just enough to stop me. Then she'd giggle again, that same soft, weird giggle. I never told anyone. How do you explain something like that when you're a kid? I figured no one would believe me. It wasn't every night that something scary happened. Some nights she'd just lie there quietly. I'd hear her whispering to herself sometime. Words I couldn't make out, soft and steady, like she was talking to someone I couldn't hear. This went on for years. During the day, she was totally normal. Made my lunch, helped with homework, joked with me, hugged me. I remember trying to work up the courage to ask her about it once when I was around 10. I said something dumb like, "Mom, why do you sleep under my bed?" She just blinked at me and smiled. "Oh, buddy, I don't do that. You must be having silly dreams." But that night, she was there again, and the tapping was louder. By the time I was 9 or 10, I stopped looking under the bed. I started sleeping on the couch when I could get away with it. Eventually, when I turned 11, she told me I was old enough to have a lock on my door. She never came back into my room. I don't know why she did it. I don't know what changed. She passed away when I was 23. Cancer. In her last weeks, she was confused a lot of the time, drifting in and out. But one night, when I was sitting by her bed, she grabbed my wrist and said very clearly, "I kept you safe, you know. You were never alone at night." I still don't understand what she meant. Story 2. I was lying in my bed when my phone rang on my chest. It was a private number, which most times I would choose to ignore. But I have mental health and physical health problems, so I picked up on the chance that it may have been a doctor or my counselor or something, which isn't at all out of the ordinary. However, it was about 10:30 at night, so I internally had a hard time believing it would be either anyway. I put the phone up to my ear and said, "Hello," in a slightly annoyed tone, as I was fairly dubious as to who was calling me, to which the voice of a woman responded, "Hi," followed by my first name in a voice I could barely recognize. Instantly, this set off alarms in my head, and I felt my heart rate increase significantly. I tried to keep my cool and said, "Who is this?" in that same slightly annoyed tone as before. I wasn't gonna rule out that it could have been someone I knew fucking with me, and although the voice sounded a little recognizable, it almost seemed like the voice they were using was being put on, as to hide any recognition. The fiest question they asked me was, "Do you have a girl?" Which admittedly was an odd question to ask, so I replied, "No," which was true. They let out a brief chuckle that sounded mocking and rude, and I said, "Why do you ask me?" To which they didn't reply and chuckled again. I began to say something, which I now don't remember, and they interrupted me by saying, "What's it like in my town name these days?" My heart sank. For context, I live in an area with a few small towns before the countryside begins for a good 100 or so miles. So it wasn't like they were saying, "What's it like in New York?" or something of the likeness. My town has a population of around 10,000 people, so it was no vague statement. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied. The shakiness in my voice was noticeable to me, but I think I hid my panic from them well enough. Again they chuckled, almost in the exact same tone as they had the previous 2 times. They then proceeded to claim that we used to date a few years ago, and when I asked who they were, they said, "I'm not telling you," dragging out the last word in a sort of playful tone. Their voice bared some resemblance to a person I had dated previously. However, they claimed they used to go to my school, which in itself is strange, knowing which school I went to, and got kicked out in the first year, or secondary, for setting a fire in the girls' bathroom. And they also claimed we dated briefly 3 years ago. The girl whose voice sounded similar I had been with much more recently and had never attended my school. Now, I had been at that school my whole life, before I finished about 5 years ago, and I neither remember rekindling with anyone I used to know, nor did I remember anyone getting kicked out for setting a fire in the toilets. I began to get this strange feeling. None of her facts were adding up, and then I began to wonder where this person found my number, or even how they at all knew who I was. I gritted my teeth and said in an assertive voice, "Who the fuck is this?" To which she chuckled one final time and ended the call. My head spun in confusion. I opened Snapchat and messaged some old classmates, some of whom I hadn't reached out to in half a decade, to inquire about a person getting kicked out under such circumstances. My memory doesn't serve at the best of times, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt regarding the truth of her story. However, no one could recall the event. I was shook, but slowly forgot about it. About a month later, I arrived home from work, went into my flat, and cracked open a beer. By this point, the ordeal had left my mind completely. This was a Friday, so by the end of the night, I'd had about 6 beers and was feeling pretty drunk, and I crashed on the sofa. At around 4 a.m., the sound of my flat's front door clicking shut woke me up. Still tipsy, I figured I might have been hearing things and fell back asleep almost immediately. But when I got up the next morning, the place had been trashed. Wallpaper ripped, TV on the ground, chairs flipped, freezer open, things of that nature. Someone came to my flat specifically, stole nothing, and trashed the place entirely. I wasn't angry, but I felt this strange, sickening anxiety. I still wonder if those two events were linked. Story 3. For as long as Bex could remember, he has hated his mother. If it was not her bad decisions, it was her choice in lovers, always saying that how good each one was. Even when they stole from her, hurt her with words or their hands, she would say how much she loved them, but he hated the fighting, the abuse, drugs, and drinking. It is the reason Bex left home. He left home at 18, moving in with a friend's family until he was able to graduate. From there, Bex went to university and earned a degree from his apartment. Working and earning a degree was difficult at first, but he was able to juggle it perfectly, finding a rhythm that worked for him. Now his relationship with his mother was estranged. She still had not changed her ways, choosing to leave the way she wanted. Bex's mother was adult, after all, and who was he to voice his concern about how she was living her life? He did not know why he was thinking of her now. Maybe it was the connection between mother and child. Whatever the feeling was, Bex had not thought about her in 18 years. As these thoughts swirled around in his mind, Bex's eyes began to droop from his comfortable spot on the couch. Work had been tiresome, slow, and there had not been enough caffeine in the world to keep him awake. Bex yawned and deciding to sleep. Sometime during the early morning, he woke up to his phone buzzing in his pocket. Bex let out a string of curses, hoping that it was not work trying to call him in. He squinted his eyes and looked at the screen, surprised to see a call from a number he did not know. It was over a dozen calls, and a few voicemails. Checking the messages, he furrowed his brow at the unrecognizable words, the heavy buzz of static, and what he thought was his name. Bex may not have understood what they were trying to say, but that voice, though, was unmistakable. The voice belonged to her, his mother. He really did not want to call her back, but what if it was an emergency and she needed help? Dialing the number, he tried calling her, only for it to write to a generic voicemail recording. Had her phone died, or was she on the phone with the police? Bex tried sending her a text message and waited for a response that never came. He reached out to family members asking if they had heard from her, but they had not. Feeling that sense of dread from earlier, he got up, heading towards the door, and grabbed his keys. Bex got into his car and started up the engine, heading in the direction of where his mom lives. The radio cutting out and buzzing with interference. Switching over to a different radio station, the host was going over a list of missing persons, along with mentions of unusual sightings as of late reported by locals in the area. Bex had thought these things had been only rumors, not actual news, but they were true. Pulling into the driveway of his mother's apartment, it stepped out his car and headed to the door. Bex tried the door handle and found it locked. So he knocked on the door, calling out to his mom. The house was eerily silent, since he was always used to the TV or radio blaring in the background. Bex looked around at the windows and front, inspecting for signs of forced entry. Seeing that everything was in place, He was a bit more at ease to know that no one had broken in. Taking out his keys, he used the spare he still had on him and entered the apartment. When flipping the light switch, Bex watched as the light flickered, as if fighting to stay on, then began going dim to complete darkness and back to bright again, as if there was a power surge. Bex began to look around for clue, to see if maybe she had left some clues behind. Her purse still sat on the island counter untouched and unopened, a phone charger next to it. On the fridge was a hastily written note he did not understand. "It is coming for me. Dear God, what do I do?" What did that mean? Who exactly was coming for her? Next to the back door of the apartment was shards of broken glass and a set of footprints leading outside. Bex decided to follow the prints outside into the chilly night air. Taking out his phone, the screen glitched and hummed with an ear-piercing static. Holding it away from his ear, he winced in pain as the sound slowly faded. When the sound finally stopped, he turned on the flashlight and shone it around, trying to spot anything in the backyard. A voice to call out to him. It was his mother's next-door neighbor. Bex decided to take this time to ask the man if he had seen his mother, that she had called him multiple times leaving voicemails that did not make sense, and how it was unlike her to do so. "No, that you mention it. Last night I saw her talking with someone," the neighbor told Bex. "Who did you see with her?" The man shrugged, scratching his beard. "Didn't get a good look at them, but—" He paused. Bex questioned. "But what, exactly? Could you not make out any feature?" "Well, I may have just been seeing things, because it seemed like that were just a shadow. His mother was last seen talking to a shadow, who may have not even been human. How was that even possible? There was something else, too. There were strange noises coming from the apartment." Bex furrowed his brow, confused. What had his mother gotten herself into? He decided to go to the only phone company they had in the area and have his mother's cell phone tracked. Apparently, the last known location was deep in the national forest. Following the coordinates, he came across an old factory which had long since been closed. But why was it out here? Inside the old factory, he tried calling his mother's phone to see if he could hear it here. Bex's ear perked up to a faint ringing, beginning to follow it to where it was the loudest. There, in the mass of a bunch of metal scrap and machinery, was his mother's phone. The phone lit up, displaying his number, but his mother was nowhere in sight. Had she been drawn here and then kidnapped? Using a handkerchief, he bent down to pick it up. Soon as he touched it, the phone skid across the floor and into the dark. There was no way he was going to chase after a phone that moved itself. Either by sure will or something pulled it back by an invisible fishing line. Bex's phone rang in his pocket. As he his eyes on the darkness, he took out his phone, glancing at the screen. It was his mother's number. Letting it go to voicemail, he listened closely to see if someone would speak. Bex did not expect to hear a voice out of the darkness. "Bex, why don't you answer your mother?" There was a slight pause. "You never call me. Don't you love your mother?" He gulped and stepped back. No, whatever that was speaking in the darkness was not his mother. He knew she was gone. And whatever this thing is, it was trying to lure him in the same way it had gotten her. The uneven rhythm of footsteps echoed thud, drag, thud, drag, coming towards him. Appearing from the shadows was a tall, corpse-like figure. its mouth sewn shut with black wire.
From its stitched lips came his mother's muffled voice, then turned to static, like turning the dial on a radio trying to find a signal.
Its fingers are like old rotary phone coil, and it flickered faintly. Bex began to run out of the factory and back inside his car. Pressing the start button, he backed up the car and sped out of the National Forest. The factory in his rear-view mirror began to get further away. There was no way he was going back there. His mother was gone, and he knew that he would not be able to get her back. If Bex ever wanted to reconcile with her, it would have to be in the afterlife.
The following day, he made a missing person report and gave the police all the information they had. Bex warned them to be careful going to the factory in the National Forest. A deep shudder racked through his body when they told him that there had never been an old factory in the National Forest. Then just where had he gone exactly? Wherever it had been, he did not plan to go back anyway. Not after seeing what that creature had looked like. The one who had been making those calls and leaving the voicemails. It used his mother's voice to lure him in. Bex was sure that he was not the first one that it had led out to that place. Before he had ran away, he noticed at the creature's feet was scattered and discarded cell phones from earlier victims. At least his did not become added to the pile.